and then we'll have a conversation after that. So welcome.
Sounds great. And I have a few slides if you guys can pull those up.
Yes, we'll get those going.
So as we pull those up, so I'm talking today about building a future-ready heartland. And I think that as I look at who's on the call today, many of them are my compatriots in building the future's work in Kansas. And if nothing else, I mean, you really need the community and you can't do this alone. So I'm from the Center for Public Partnerships and Research. We started, or we've been around for about 10 years. And we have 100 individuals, and we're a multidisciplinary team. And our mission is to optimize well-being of children, youth, and families. And in my opinion, you really can't do that if you're not future ready and future focused, and also focused on systems transformation. But I want to tell you a little bit today about my journey into futures work. So next slide, please. So some of the areas that we focus on and the sectors we work on are early childhood and maternal and child health, and just family and child systems and well-being. And so we've been doing a lot of strategic planning, and needs assessments and evaluations have been our bread and butter. And about in 2019, we were working on a massive needs assessment of looking at early childhood, and we were traveling around the state, and we're asking people of, tell us about the status quo, and what do we need, and what's your vision? And I was really disappointed because a lot of the things that we were talking about as our vision hadn't really changed from the last 10 years when we had done the same thing. And at the time, we had two consultants from Observatory for Public Sector Innovation who were there, and they had also invited Jake to tag along. And so I got to meet Jake at that. And I was just complaining afterwards of like, there really hasn't been that much that has changed since we started this work 10 years ago. And we kind of could have pulled those same things out. And one of the consultants looked at me and said, well, what's your idea? And I didn't have one, and felt like really, really stuck. And at that point, really felt like I needed to start doing something different and looking for some other ways to view the world. Also around this time, and then we, plunged into COVID and the pandemic, and just the despair that was so pervasive everywhere. I mean, I felt personally like I could make a choice and get sucked into that, or I had to find some other tether to maintain hope. And I really found Urgent Optimists and the Futures work to be kind of a salvation and a place to that could be kind of a wellspring for at least fostering that in myself. I also have like an inherent belief that the systems and such that we have right now just isn't good enough. And I think that people deserve more, and have really found that futures work, and particularly the first person futures, helps people to be able to articulate and name that, and have found it really incredible in my work. So that's how I kind of stumbled into it with Jake, and I'm going to share a little bit more about what happened. So next slide, please. As I was starting this out, I had like three kind of things just swirling around in my head. One is I feel like that it's important to develop the next generation of leaders, and how we prepare. I'm a torch passer and believe that, as I'm nearing not the end of my career, but, I've been around a bit. My main job is to help others be, amazing and be successful in their work life and also in their home life. I don't think you have to make a choice, and futures work fits in that paradigm. Also, it has to be practical. As I share a little bit later, some of the stuff that, it can't just be a bunch of tools that's really fluffy. It has to be something that makes sense in people's work. And the other thing is, how do we develop a network of people who come together and are holding the future at all times, and bringing it up into multiple conversations around the state? So those were kind of the the goals that were kicking around in my head. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about some of the activities that we've been doing, and it looks like it's really nice and tidy now, but it was not. And this has been a pretty organic way to get there, but I'm a social worker, and so really think about the ecological framework and individual, organization, and community. And so have some wonderful staff on my team and researchers who are going like, this has all been so intentional, and they did a logic model for me. And I'm like, well, I'm glad it looks like it makes sense now, because that's not really the way that it evolved. But so I'm going to talk through a few things now, and you can go on to the next slide, please, on some of the programs that we've done. So Future Fellows has been one of the biggest joys of my work in the past several years. And the way Future Fellows came about was, it was during the pandemic, and I was brainstorming with the executive director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet, Melissa Rooker, and of saying like, what if we like started creating this like network of ambassadors for the future? And if we like picked people from around the state. And she was like, that's a really good idea. And so like we typed it up, and she shared it with the governor's office, and the governor's office, Governor Kelly said, that's a really cool idea. Let's do it. And so I came back to my staff and I said, okay, so we're going to do this program called Future Fellows. And she's like, what is it? I'm like, well, I don't know. It's like 10 minutes old, and I don't know what we're going to do on this, but let's figure it out. And so we've gone through a couple of iterations on that, and we have several Future Fellows on the call today. So if you guys want to drop anything in chat or add color to this, I invite you to do this. But the first year, I would say that we're pretty focused on, like, we wanted to help individuals be able to come up with a project and to come up with like a future scenario in their own community. And what those fellows in that first cohort told us was, we don't want to do this individually. We really want to do this as a group, and we want a collective agenda. And also, one of the most powerful things of that, other than, or beyond the learnings and the tools that we shared, was that people were saying it didn't make them feel so alone, because they were out there and, had a natural inclination to lead and be looking at things in the future. But they often felt like they were, pushing a boulder uphill, and were just kind of on their own in doing that. And then the second year, we really focused on tools and did a lot of, here, you can try this out. And then I think we're a little bit too heavy on the tools. And then the third year, we're really trying to balance it on understanding what futures is, and then a lot more focused on practicality and how you can use that, and creating other opportunities for fellows to come together. And next slide, please. So this is just that one right there. This is kind of the makeup of where people are from. So it's a mix of urban and rural, and different sectors that are coming together. So next slide, please. And this Jennifer, who just posted in chat, she was one of our first fellows, and really talked a lot about the future of the network, or the power of the network. And I'm not going to read what she said there, but really has been a model in how she's using it in her own work, and that it can be a real rejuvenating point to rally around issues that you're struggling with. And she has a lot of examples of how she's been integrating it into conversations at her staff meeting, and how it's really started getting them to do some strategic planning about what do we need to be doing in 20 years. And I think, again, the theme here is that, when we do this together, it doesn't feel like you're so alone. So that's a theme in all of this work. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that was born out of the Future Fellows was that we're trying to figure out how we could have some program that was cross-cohort. And so we have 3 leaders, one from each cohort, who is coming together to build out this program or initiative. And the overall goal is to catalyze 2024 Kansans to be architects of multiple futures. And they have been so amazing. They meet every Friday, and I try and make it as much as I can because it is cup filling. And I think the thing that is really amazing about this is they want to make it so that it's available to everybody. And so the approaches are taking it to the state fair, also getting it out to students, and also then in a more informal way and by using hospitality as the forum to talk about futures. So by organizing dinners around the future of food. And we're just in the beginning stages of this. But the other thing that I think is very refreshing about this is the Hope Core, and of really like pulling that string because I'm very good about articulating how things are going to hell in a handbasket. But when you try and articulate what is good and the possibility in things, we're not as sharp in our vision on that. So that's really awesome. And Kate and Jennifer, who are both posted in chat, are leading that work. And again, they are excellent resources and just a bundle of joy. So next slide, please. So in addition to the work that we're doing with individuals and outward facing, I've been talking about futures internally for a while and do this through a number of venues. The first one is, I just called it Awkward Hour because I couldn't really think of another name, and it kind of labels what we do. I've used this as a way to, I'm just like one webinar or tool ahead of others on like trying out this stuff. And so I brought a lot of things to our internal team, and we usually have like 15 to 20 people show up, and it might be, we did 100 ways things can be different. We have done future wheels. We have done signal scans, and we've just tried out different things. And sometimes I'm not very good at presenting it, or the exercise doesn't work and it gets uncomfortable and awkward. And so, my way out of that is like, well, that's awkward. And then we move on. But it's been really cool to see how people are taking it and applying it in their own work. And sometimes leading other things. And I'm like, wow, that's really awesome. I'm learning from that too. So it's been a really fun exchange. We also did a Futures 101 at our staff meeting so it was 100 people, and a bunch of different folks shared their experience, led us through Thing from the Future, and devised, we used it with our own work. So what would CPPR be like in 20 years? And some people said, they blew up the building because they said, we don't need that anymore because we've solved stuff. And it was really exciting to see how far people took that. We also did a train the trainer of urban planning students to be able to run scenarios. And then also we did, I'll just, you can go on to the next slide because I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. So this one is some alternative futures scenarios that Jake and I think several of you on the call and the Future Fellows helped construct by looking at emerging trends and also signals. And we ran 2 scenarios, Ad Astra, Per Aspera, and The Future is Coming. And you can click on those to get a little bit more detail. But we held this meeting in November, and it was a multi-generational group. We had people ranging from 12 years old and this group of junior high students to in their 70s. And it was just a really, really rich conversation. And we created holidays and had some artifacts from that. So that was kind of our first foray into that. Next slide, please. And the other thing that we do is we always have a graphic recorder to come to all the events and just kind of capture this as an artifact and remembrance from the day. And this is the artifact from that. Next slide, please. And then we also partnered with Afro Rhythms and the Common Book experience at KU. So every year KU does a common book, and we were only supportive of this in the sense of providing the graphic recorder. But it was really fun to see this work growing. And this was the common book was Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And it's nice to see that growing work at KU. Next slide, please. And then the next thing that we did, so we had a junior high student or a junior high teacher who came to the event in November, and she said, I'd really like to do this with all the students who are thinking about doing future cities. And so in 5 weeks, it was right before the end of the school year, we cobbled this together and we held an event for 152 junior high students. And it was kind of crazy. You have to adapt things a little bit. And it was so interesting because with the students, we didn't have to convince them about why futures thinking. They just automatically got it. And we had a couple of rounds of Think from the Future ready for them. And they like blew through that and we're kind of like, what's next? And so we had a few lessons learned from this. One is that you need to adopt your scenarios into language that's a little bit more consumable for that age group. And also you have to get things popping a little more because they take things, they pick up things faster, and you just have to have a better cadence. So that's a little bit about that. And next slide, please. The thing that I think is really magical about this work is just the ripple effect that it has. And I like to think about every person that I have a conversation with, if you can like spark something in them or connect, then if they tell 3 people and you start like building out your network, what's that going to look like? And so next slide, please. So we just started thinking about what the ripple effect is if all of these things happen. And the only thing that hasn't already happened on here is the 2024. But I did a little bit of math, and if let me back up on that. Not if, but when we touch and have conversations with 2024 people, our effect on talking with people about futures work will be well over 8,000 people. And to me, that is just what this is all about, because what magic can happen when you have that many people holding multiple futures. So that's my orientation, Jake. I'm ready for a conversation.
Well, I want to say something about everything you said, but I'm not going to. Thank you. That was a wonderful intro, and I hope others will jump in, please, either in the Q&A. As I said, we'll be monitoring the chat too, but sometimes that gets lost in the mix. So add to either, but the Q&A will definitely have a better chance of seeing it. First of all, just sort of a kind of vibe check. I love it because there's the quality that you and your team have, which is kind of mixed between humility. You're not saying you know everything. You're kind of building this as you go along and opening yourself up. So I'm learning too. I mean, awkward hour is a great example of that. But also fearlessness goes along with it. So you're not scared to try new things. You're not scared to push the boundaries or have it all figured out before you start going. And I love that mix of qualities for futures work. I think it's important for the people on the call to know that you don't have to have it all figured out to start. And as you said, like what is this? I don't know. We just got approval 10 minutes ago. Let's build it. So that kind of sensibility, I think, is really beneficial to it. Of course, you want to, as you're a rigorous worker, you think through the systems, but you're also not limited by that or paralyzed because you don't have everything figured out down the stretch. Things will emerge too, and you have a strong vision and flexibility on how you get there. I think that's one of the qualities we admire and look for in futures thinkers. And then the other part is just the kind of toggling or scaling, telescoping between big systems. Oh my gosh, the healthcare system or the, child wellness and all of these big, hairy, complex, wicked systems that you're having to deal with, also very personal. This meeting filled my cup. This helped me feel connected to people. So that emotional feeling side of it, in addition to the big abstract systems dynamics that are happening, I think that's also an important sensibility that benefits futures thinking. So I just wanted to call that out. It stood out very, very clearly in this presentation and the work that we've done together. I'm going to focus, though, a lot of my questions, a few questions here at the beginning, then we'll go into looking what others have asked, but just really practical stuff, because I know I've been down there in the weeds with you and like trying to figure out things on the ground to make this work and improvising sometimes in the moment and dealing with politics and dealing with turf wars and dealing with people's hangups and getting money for it and getting the graphic recorder in the room. So I want to kind of focus on some of those practical questions that we have. But so first of all, there was actually a question in the chat. Where do you get your funding? So let's start with the most practical there. How is the center funded? How do you sustain projects and have a sustainable continued existence? And then, so there's two parts of that. We'll go into that, and then I'll come back to some other things. But how is it funded? How do you sustain the center? And then assessing your own impact. So some of those practicalities about the organizational structure would be good to start with.
So how do we stay funded? I mean, we're all soft funded. We don't get any funding from the university, and it's all by writing grants and just contracts. So, I mean, you always feel like you got one foot on a banana peel. And I mean, that's just, I've gotten really used to that. But I also strongly believe that you shouldn't be limited by the funding. And so I think the thing with futures work is, on its own, no one is going to just fund futures work for the value add of, like, on its own. It just feels too fluffy for people right now. I hope we get there, but you have to show the connection and the value add. So we're including it right now, and we're using 3 Horizons as a frame for a needs assessment to do substance use disorders, to understand what's going on around the state. And to help people dream of, like, and it fits really nicely in something like that, because it's that funding is from the opioid master settlement, and it's a 16-year funding source. And so you can really see a lot of changes during that time period. But I think it's like, so of looking at how you can include it. So if you're doing a needs assessment, or you're doing systems planning, or you're writing reports, or even in the programming of, it fits really nicely. I don't see how you can do systems transformation work without the future focus, because otherwise you're always planning for that one linear future, and it just doesn't work like that. So I think you have to look for how you can pair it and how you just embed it. But as a standalone, I haven't been successful on getting funding. I have to really infuse it with other work that we're doing.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, I kind of, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but the idea of fluffy comes up a lot. It's interesting. I know, that assumption comes in, and I have my own opinions about that. But what is your take on that? Is it because it doesn't exist, the data? There's one thing we say, there are no future facts. Is it because of that? Is it because it, is associated with sci-fi or speculation? I'm just, like, on the ground working with, I don't know if it's elected officials or bureaucrats or people that you're getting funding from, or foundations, but just the tenor of what their assumptions, maybe hangups are. I know you mentioned already the solutions, but just a little bit more of that flavor of what are they coming in the room thinking that futures is and isn't?
I think and I mean, at least in my own experience, it's more of that people don't have the luxury to just focus on the future and they're experiencing it as an either or.
Mm,
Because I mean, when it was during the pandemic, I would have people, and I had a couple of future fellows that were going like, that sounds really awesome and I love these tools, but like I'm getting pounded with just the urgency of the moment and trying to figure that out. But then at the end of that, they were coming back and going like, I don't have to do either or. I can actually hold both.
mm,
And I think that that's a real breakthrough. But I think part of it comes down to of like people don't think that they deserve more than they have. And so it's
mm.
kind of that treading water. And one of my favorite books is Ministry for the Future. And he talks in there about it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. And that to me was just like a demonstration of we just can't imagine that things could be better. And we haven't been trained to do that. I mean, it's kind of we've been in such austerity. And so I think you just get conditioned.
Mm. That's good. Yeah, kind of a good addition to where I was coming from, which was more like an intellectual thing. Oh, this discipline doesn't, is it, the way that it's done. But what you're saying, it's more, I am so concerned or so pressured by the present. I can't, don't even, I don't have time for that. Especially, I mean, you come from social work. We were all in those moments where the urgency of the now overwhelms our ability or even our willingness to think about the future. And then the second part is we don't really have those muscles that we're not used to thinking about the future. We just sort of, put it off because we don't have that experience. We haven't tried it out. We don't understand even what it is. And we haven't exercised those kind of visionary imagination muscles in a rigorous way. Yeah, those are great
Yeah.
points.
And even with our
Um,
future fellows, I mean, they're all really, really committed, but it's hard to get people together because it's
yeah,
like, you have the futures work you're doing, but then you have like some crisis or, we call them cows, crisis of the week that you have to deal with at work that you like can't tell people no on because that's part of your job.
right. But the move that you made and others have made is that the future is not the enemy of the present. We can look ahead and still, because if you're only, sticking your fingers in the the dike of this falling apart, you're never going to deal with a systematic issue. So yeah, I can deal with things on the ground, but if the system is still churning out these problems, these challenges every day, then you're gonna keep running around in circles and never solving anything. So yeah, that's
Yep.
what we try, often to make that point is that the future and the present and even the past are complementary pieces to the story and they can fit together and making time for that is one of our first accomplishments in any of this is like let me carve out a time. And so as you say, doing it kind of opportunistically, maybe going where something is or creating, the awkward hour or something that's fun or different to fit it in that doesn't feel like it's taking you away from work but actually adding to your skill set or your approach to things. So yeah, so that's great. I'm gonna actually start going over, and I may throw in some other questions too, but I want to get to some of the audience questions. Uh, and the next one up I see here is, can you give more detail? Uh, I think it's the use of AI in the youth project. Were you using AI in that
We
project?
we haven't actually used it yet. That was one of our takeaways because it was interesting when we were talking with the so we in one of the alternative futures that talks about communities coming together, and I think that it was communalism that was used.
Mm,
And so we had several students who were going like, yeah, I don't know if I want communism. And it's just like, okay, so we're going to have to like, just write it. And these were like really, really smart kids, but it's too much to absorb and such. And so I have a student worker who actually took the scenarios and ran them through. I think she uses Claude and kind of rewrote them. And our intent is to try them out.
okay, great. Well, I kind of wanted to talk about that, the practicalities too. So we did this scenario project and we had multiple scenarios and there were pushback about certain ones. So just, the already asked about the sort of perception coming in, but getting this work through on the ground, maybe some of the experiences you've had navigating that, because it's difficult. You work with I mean, like a lot of the people on the call, with different kind of partners at different levels. So elected officials
Sure.
or university bureaucrats and public on the ground and foundations and people. Just maybe some of your favorite experiences that you've had to navigate, or challenges maybe for the audience to learn from some of your experiences.
Sure. So we had three scenarios going into this work, and one of them was just, honestly, too on the nose. And I think some of the people who are on this call helped prepare some of those. And so I've also had incredible support by my own supervisor in the institute that we are at, the Achievement Assessment Institute, and so had asked for some support and funding to be able to have this event at the university that was Alternative Futures. And one of them was just a little bit too hot to handle. And we are in a political environment that, sometimes gets swept up with hyperbole and gets paralyzed on a few things that don't advance the plot for the common people. And so we had to make a decision of if we were going to tank the entire event or if we were going to make a compromise. And I mean, Jake and I had a pretty, it was a hard discussion, because it's like, I know this is the process. I know that, you consider all the futures, but my alternative here is to not do it, or to like figure out some type of way forward. And I also think that the more that you do it, the more that you get people used to, you're not saying that this is a future, you're saying that this could be one of them. And I think you get people a little bit more used to it, and maybe there is a little bit more tolerance, but you have to build that.
Yeah, I know from that, just, in the experience, it was kind of a theocratic oriented future. And so obviously, in our climate today, people get caught up, and, it gets them thinking the wrong way, because one of our goals is actually to provoke, as you said at the very start. Like, I'm thinking too conventionally. Like, my vision from 10 years ago is the same. Nothing has changed. So what are we doing if we're not pushing people to think new thoughts? On the other side, our enemy is dismissal, and not taking anything, not just being pushed and provoked in a useful way, but off-putting and dismissing and alienating. And so there's no one right answer to do that. It's situational, and you have to understand. And sometimes, in this case, a very uncomfortable compromise to pull that out so that something positive can happen. And I will say, I argued to keep it in very rigorously, vigorously, I should say. But I think ultimately it turned out very, very good and very, very effective. There were two scenarios, so at least there's plurality in that, and that was important too. Part of it is to get people thinking about alternatives. And then, as you say, where do you build? Can you build from a little bit of an incursion and get people on board, and then maybe push and push? So it's always a kind of situational assessment of, do I come in, just full on, like, I'm going to confront you with this and you're going to deal with it. I mean, there are times when that's the right modality to take, and there's other times where you need to kind of meter out a little bit more slowly, like build kind of momentum or build strength more modestly, or from the start in that way. So I think it's a really interesting case study, and how that those ways of engaging can be different and effective in different ways.
Yeah, I think that the other thing on that, though, is that I was really conscious on, if we want to do more futures work and foresight work in our day to day, you also have to create the demand in order to be able to get funded to like supply.
Yeah.
And so if it's such a turnoff and doesn't seem useful, then you're like not going to be able to get any type of momentum going.
All right. Yeah. So that's always a balance and an art, really, honestly, to know your audience and where to push and where to pull. Because again, I probably err on the side of pushing but that's, there are times when that works and there are times when that actually it has negative outcomes. So we're going to scale at different levels of question here and see how the flow goes. But there's a question here from Hannes Combus. He says, does Kansas University of Kansas has an undergraduate or graduate program in Foresight? Are you using Foresight in your planning session? So is there anything formal happening beyond what you're doing or integrated into what you're doing?
Not yet. So there isn't any undergraduate or graduate program, but we are starting to see some threads being pulled, and it's popping up around campus. I think a couple of other people from KU Commons are on the call today, and they're the ones that put together the Common Book and the Afro Rhythms Future event. And so we're starting to see some demand, and I have been invited to lead a discussion at the university about the future of learning. And so we're seeing some requests. And I think people overall talk about futures a lot, but not in the sense that we're talking about it today. I mean, everybody talks about the future, but Jake, as I've heard you say many, many times, we don't do it very well when we're predicting the future. So not yet. But hopefully we can continue to grow that.
Well, and maybe a side question. So I know the workshop that we were at, the first one in November, there was, I don't know, 5 or 6 middle school students. That was kind of, again, a kind of opportunistic thing that got momentum going. And there was a larger, what did you say? It was 100 middle school students?
152.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So that's a data point for everybody on the call as a, an engagement signal. What do you think the future of that? Because that feels like there's momentum there. How do you see that going? Is there anything in the pipeline to build off that sort of middle school based or school based
Yeah.
foresight?
I think there's a lot of potential there. That is one of the goals of the group that's coming together around the civic foresight. And so, but again, the group is really practical. They don't want to reinvent the wheel. So they're collecting what are the tools that we can build on. So they're trying to identify trying to identify some opportunities where it can be infused into curriculum at the high school. And I mean, I get kind of giddy when I think about like, what would it be like if the next generation of like public servants and people running organizations had futures training in high school? I mean, geez Louise, that's like super powerful. So I think that that is one thing that is a great potential. And then I've heard, so we also got asked if we could package what we did for future cities, and if that could potentially be distributed throughout the state and available to others. So people have been gone for the summer, so we're excited to resume those conversations.
Good. And do you have a blog that you post? Because I want to point people to a place to keep up with this and myself too, other than asking you. But yeah, do you chronicle this work if people want to keep an eye on it?
We try to, yes. We have a dissemination and a very robust communications team. And so by checking on our website and then following us on LinkedIn, we always post all of our blogs and just the event chronicles of that there.
Okay, good. Yeah, keep an eye on that, and we'll link in the chat and after. So I think we're going to go back to a little bit of a more conceptual piece here from a question from Lindsay Wilbur from Hawaii. Could you speak on Heartland futures and how these visions of alternative futures could give perspectives to the rest of the country? I'm sort of noting, not to make this too topical, but 2 coastal presidential candidates have picked Heartland, so to speak, vice presidential candidates, and so there is a story here about how that dynamic works. And so, just the point of view of this question, what does Heartland futures mean, and what does it mean for you on the ground there, but also maybe in terms of the rest of the country? What kind of inspiration or guidance is coming from this approach?
I think overall, again, of like practical and like how can we take action today? I think, I hear Tim Walz and some of the things he was saying about, if you talk about something with someone else, then you've like basically the mantra is don't brag and talk about what you're doing. And I think that is alive and well in the Heartland. And so I think it's just a modest approach of, taking a look at what you have and trying to make the best that you can out of it. And so I think that the Heartland values were very practical, we're resilient, and we're not going anywhere. And of just kind of like, how do we build? And I think the coming together of it, if we can, I mean, I'm pretty hopeful now about the presidential race, and I wasn't a month ago. So I think that people are starting to think about the possibilities again. And I think if we can connect with the Heartland and not, we can always have fringe, and I lived on the coast and loved the fringe there and felt like I had found my people in San Francisco and Berkeley. And also you need the people who are just like going to get stuff done and who are going to be really practical. And I think of recognizing that we really need both, and what can we learn from both perspectives puts us in a stronger position.
Right. And to have that perspective on the table, that visionary future is not just some sort of sci-fi or tech vision from Silicon Valley or, other places, that there is a vision of a kind of future here. And that's why alternative futures, I think, is so beneficial, is to say there are different kinds of futures out there that are possible and that people might prefer. And so having these visions, there was a project many years ago we did at IFTF that was built around the idea of practical visionaries, which I love that term. And I kind of get that sensibility from what you're saying here. Yeah, it's a vision of a future, that it's very human. Maybe in a sense it's modest. It doesn't have all the whiz bang technology to it, but it has a very human core to it, and a kind of future we might actually want to live in and prefer. So having those visions out and expressed, I think, is really important.
I think the other thing is just of that we're not just a bunch of hicks. And I mean, it's often of like this really derogatory about like, we're generations behind and stuff. And that ain't the way it is. And so I think of like, it's kind of like a proper respect for Kansas and the Heartland and the mid states, because it's a pretty good place to live.
Yeah, great. Rich Minder says, I just finished reading The Truth About Immigration by Zeke Hernandez and We Are Home, Becoming American in the 21st Century. I wonder how our social and cultural institutions fail to imagine a much more pluralistic environment in the future. How do you suggest we imagine a future? So kind of maybe in some of the themes we're already discussing here.
Rich, I think that I know Rich. He lives like 2 blocks over from me. So
you can just yell the answer over.
So I think futures work is actually really well suited, and we've had several of the future fellows be from communities that are engaging, and so one of the things that they've tried out is how you welcome, and of like of creating welcoming committees. And it also reminded me of one of the scenarios of Urgent Optimists, and I actually leaned pretty heavily on that in some of the work. And that was the one about, so if the US, so there was a big climate referendum, and the US was going to have to take 250 million new citizens. And so who are you going to be? Were you going to be in a welcoming community, or were you going to be a transient? And I did the welcoming part. And so like, how was I going to have to adapt my approach, and brought some of those things into some of the future fellows work. So I think of like, imagining that you are going to have more people into your home, and what are you going to do about it? What are the stresses that are going to come within your community? How do you need to adapt socially, economically, all of those things, that it's a great way to build out some scenarios and to try some things.
Great. Thank you. A couple questions here, maybe similar, kind of going back to the origin story a little bit. Can you go back to how you started, and how did you get started with your first set of partners? Maybe a little bit more on that, the initial spark at the start.
It actually happened like quicker than I thought. Because I mean, again, I was just like toying with it and sketched it out on a whiteboard. And then we were able to get funding for the first round of our future fellows through another bigger grant that we had. But it was part of systems work. So I think you have to like talk to a lot of people about it and share your vision. And I mean, there's a certain amount of you got to sell the dream and talk about what could happen. And I've like leaned pretty heavily on other urgent optimists, and that is a great community of hearing like the amazing things and the way that people are infusing it into their everyday. But I think of like constantly talking to people, and we put together some like just some pointers of how you can bring it up in a coffee conversation, how you can infuse it into a staff meeting, how you can talk about it in an organization and or in a presentation. And I think that when you start hearing other people using your words and talking about how we need to anticipate multiple futures, then it gets a little bit easier.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one of the, as kind of foreshadowed at the beginning, it's kind of hard to tell if futures is getting embedded, is it working, and one of the more subtle metrics is, are people using the language? Are they using the kind of concepts and ideas? Is it a line item in the agenda? Those kind of things are evidence that is actually having an impact or getting some traction. Similarly, another question here, could you provide some examples of how your futures work has affected thinking about specific policies or plans? Has there been any changes to maybe internally with CPPR or, your community at another level of abstraction?
Yeah, I mean, we used we used a combination of complexity software. So we were using sense making software and also some futures work to identify kind of like what is coming next in during the pandemic, so you could start getting a little bit ahead of like the rolling needs. So that is one way, but just internally, it has changed the way that it's changed the way that we present things and our language. It has changed the way that we're doing needs assessments and also the way that we're writing up results. I think that it gives you a little bit more of a provocative edge. So here are the findings, but it could go in these three directions, and to help people prepare for like, what do I need to do? And what are the best practices if each one of those things happens? So I don't know if I can point to any like big policy changes. But I think it's more of like a small P. I think just overall, within my own work and my approach during hybrid, we went completely hybrid on March 13th on 2020, Friday the 13th, and we haven't gone back. So we have gone from an organization that prided, button seat every day to a hybrid organization with people in multiple states. And the futures work really helped me like stay a little bit ahead of it on, what do I need to be thinking about next? What is going to happen when we, soft launch and go back into things? And it feels good. And I think it's been a lot kinder to staff. And my goal is to help people be successful at their work life and their home life. And I don't think you should have to make a choice.
Good, which is a nice segue to our last question from the audience. How do you keep your cup filled? How do you keep your garden growing while doing this work? I know we've already talked about some of the challenges, and you said, I think we're similarly focused. It's easy to focus on the negative. It's easy to get in despair and hopeless, when certain things are happening in the news. So how do you keep going? How do you keep your cup filled in this work?
Look for the joy for one thing, and on when you see other people generating the joy, like you don't need to be the constant like creator of it. Like, of seeing other people like saying, hey, I want to do that, and ask, how can, I support you? So in some of the examples, like not all this was my work. It was like, hey, you've got a really good idea. How can we support you? And then when you see those connections made and things changing a little bit, that gives me energy. I think the other thing is to, I really like, I'm surrounded by and have some great students at KU who are helping lead some of this futures work, and the way they use AI and the way that they talk about things and vision things, it gives me great hope. And so that also really fuels me.
Right. Yeah. Your first goal there is the next generation of leadership. So, as an educator, teacher, person working with that, seeing others take it and run with it and benefit from that, from futures and other things that you're doing, I'm sure is uplifting at a certain level.
Fun.
So we're wrapping up. Sorry if we didn't get to all of the questions. I want to just give the floor to you for a moment, Jackie, before we close. Just anything that you wanted to say that hasn't been said, or a question that you wanted to be asked, or any final statements for the group here.
I just want to thank everybody for joining today. And I think that the biggest thing is the network, and of when you're kind of thinking about wacky things and what could be, and you're alone, it gets pretty discouraging. And I think probably most people on this call have had the experience of where you've talked about things and people say, I have no idea of what you're talking about. And it is nice to be around a bunch of other futurists and people who are interested in it, to say, like, I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but I'm interested in hearing and learning and building with you. So that's find your people.
Mm. Well, great point. Another great segue to finding more people, which is part of it, is this series that we have here at IFTF, and want to call your attention to our next meeting. Keep growing your network, keep learning from each other. This will be facilitated by our close friend and colleague, Tessa Finliv. And we have some folks looking at automated horizon scanning. So very much into the practicality of futures work and how do you actually look for scanning hits and seeing changes on the horizon. So we have some folks from UNDP coming in as well. And that should be good. That is happening a little over a month. So September 26th, keep your eye out for that, and keep following Jackie's team's socials and expressions, and ours as well at IFTF. You can follow us online and all of the normal conduits for information. So please stay in touch. As we've seen through this conversation, being together really helps. So reach out to myself, anybody at IFTF, and hope to see you again sometime. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, everybody. See you on the flip side.
Thanks, Jackie.